Hello and welcome to this edition of Dynamic CISO Talk Show, in which we invite some of the most accomplished technology and security leaders to talk about contemporary challenges, issues, trends, and the industry news. Today's topic is a little bit scary, very critical, very crucial, and also very important for an IT or security team member to tackle with. We will be talking about the ransomware attacks and how organizations are responding to those. Um, we will also be talking about the importance of a good data backup and data management strategy to negate or minimize the impact of the same. You would agree with me that ransomware remains the most prominent malware threat today. According to a very recent Sophos report, 37% of the respondents to that report were affected by ransomware attack in the last 1 year. In 2021, the largest ransomware uh, payout was made by an insurance company, which was at some 40 million US dollars, which was a world record. The average ransom fee requested has increased from a very small, minuscule sum, which was 5,000 US dollars in 2018, to around 200,000 US dollars in 2020, just in a span of 2 years. Experts also estimate that there is one ransomware attack that is occurring every 11 seconds through the 2021. About 1 in 6,000 emails contain suspicious URLs, which include ransomware as well. Um, One of the few last figures is that 71% of those who are affected by ransomware have been badly infected, and half of the ransomware attacks that are successful infect at least 20 computers in a particular organization. So in such a scenario, not only is it important to have an effective strategy to deal with the menace of ransomware, but also to have a dependable, reliable, and a very safe data backup strategy to quickly bounce back and run the business as usual. To talk about a lot of issues around these, I have the pleasure of having with me Dave Russell. Dave is an industry expert and a backup guru, and is currently working with Veeam Software as the Vice President of Enterprise Strategy. Welcome, Dave. How are you doing?
Yeah, very nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great, thank you, and thank you for accommodating my request and being awake at 5:30 a.m. in the U.S. So let's quickly get started. In the wake of those high-profile attacks that we have seen since the end of last year and going into 2021, which includes SolarWinds, Colonial Pipe, Kaseya, where the threat actors have been openly resorting to extortions and demanding huge ransoms. What is your take on the data breaches and data protection trends? Where do you find the industry lacking the most?
Yeah, Veeam actually earlier this year conducted the industry's largest ever data protection survey of 2,000 plus employees. And what we found is that 76% of organizations globally have a protection gap, meaning they have a gap between how frequently they back up data versus how much data that they can afford to lose in an outage. And that scenario or that statistic of 76%, 3 out of 4, means that that happens even if there was something like a file that were to go missing. Now you amplify that with the scope and magnitude of a cyber event where literally the attack surface is 100% of your data, potentially your entire organization. That issue becomes greater and greater. In fact, 80% of organizations globally say that they have an availability gap, meaning how fast they can recover data versus how fast the organization actually needs them to recover. And if I were to really net that out, I would say, and even before cyber, most organizations think that they're more resilient and more highly recoverable than they are. Along comes cybersecurity threats where in the past we've only had to restore 3 to 5% of our data on an annual basis. Now you literally could be looking at trying to recover 100% of your data.
I mean, when I said the situation is scary, I think you have responded to it in the same fashion, same tone. It is getting scarier day by day. So protecting data against ransomware requires uh, very specialized approach, very specialized solutions. The purpose of a data backup was to have a copy of data that can be recovered when required. Backup systems offer little or no protection for data or the computer systems themselves. Malware like NotPetya or Bad Rabbit or Shamoon can take over a computer's boot process and encrypt the computer's entire disk and erase all the data on the drive. Is that true? And how does if that is true, then how does data backup work against a ransomware attack?
Yeah, backups really play a crucial role in combating against ransomware. And there's a rising trend, unfortunately, where ransomware malware is targeting the backup systems as well, especially during something malicious like a cyber event. 40% of organizations globally state that one of the top global data protection challenges for 2021 this year is trying to overcome their inadequate backups or failure to meet their service level agreements. A third of organizations globally are using cloud-based backup managed by a backup as a service provider, and this is expected to rise up to 40% next year, according to our data protection report. So when we think about what can backup do, and specifically at Veeam, some of the things that we do are we offer protection against an attack by offering an air-gapped or mutable backup such that ransomware can't detect, delete, and then erase or encrypt your vital data. But speaking of detection, we also want to be able to offer analytics so that we can understand, is this activity going on in your system abnormal, unusual, so that you can take some action ahead of time. We do that with our Veeam One monitoring and alerting program. We can ensure ransomware-free backups by using something that we call Sure Backup, a technology we developed quite some time ago. There's a bad joke in the industry, but it's a true statement that it's very difficult to recover that which you have not backed up. And if I were to put a few more words on that, you can't successfully recover something that you don't know with full integrity and certainty has been backed up properly. So one of the technologies that we apply is validating the backups as soon as we take them. And in that way, we can go and make any kind of remediation or re-backup, if you will, if there's any kind of problem with the data collection that we just underwent. Now, we also can do such things like in version 11 of our product that we released earlier this year is having multiple different ways to capture data, whether it's traditional backup, replication, continuous data protection, or integrating with storage arrays. A lot of organizations are finding out that one size doesn't fit all, and that they need a variety of different ways in which to collect or back up that data to ensure that they're properly protected. Speaking of encryption, though, earlier on, we want to encrypt on the good guy side, if you will, on the white hat side, meaning use AES 256-bit encryption so that at rest and in flight, data is not out in the wild being exposed, such that you can also be subjected to situations where data is infiltrated and removed from your site and you are extorted, that while you haven't lost data yourself, you are now threatened with bad actors that will potentially leak that data out to the public. And lastly, you don't have to go through this all by yourself. We've got a rich ecosystem of Veeam Cloud and service providers, a network of organizations that can help you manage this as well, can help you achieve some of the best practices and ensure that your data and your systems are hardened and able to meet the challenges.
Sorry, just out of curiosity, I wanted to ask you something about, you mentioned in one of your previous replies, you mentioned that today is the time when most organizations would require to back up 100% of their data. Now, that actually requires an entirely new thinking towards a data backup strategy, because as opposed to backing up only the critical data that was required earlier, today we are talking of 100% 100% backup, I mean, still the organizations might go, might go a little choosy in terms of what do they need to back up and how that backup should be. Uh, so, what according to you is the growing trend? How do companies prioritize their backups?
Yeah, you're right. In the past, availability was really a best fit between the resources that you've got available and how critical the data was against the third leg of the stool being how likely was data loss. And for most of us, hopefully, we didn't experience data loss on a frequent basis. Maybe we didn't live in an environment where natural disasters or other kinds of threats were commonplace. So it was potentially easy to become a little bit loose in our cyber recovery and just our overall general availability and recovery trends. But if the attack surface really could be 100% of our data now, we really can't rest until 100% or all of our vital data is indeed properly protected. So I've seen organizations actually change their reaction or their response in terms of the cyber threats as compared to natural disasters in the past. In the past, say if there was an earthquake or a typhoon, it was pretty natural to see for a period of several months, people would look at disaster recovery, updating systems, look at expanding the data that they were protecting, but then that might taper off or trail after a certain period of time. As you pointed out in the opening, which were pretty scary statistics, cyber doesn't sleep. It's not on the decline. It's not seasonal or doesn't have variety to it. It just seems to be a constant. And if anything, that constant is increasing, not decreasing. So therefore, we really can't be lax. We have to prioritize data protection, data immutability, and spending on a comprehensive backup and protection solution to make sure that we're hardened and can excel in a digital first economy. So enabling immutability, creating backups with unique code paths, protecting backups for maximum effectiveness, and enabling seamless restore should be an integral part of every organization's robust protection strategy. There used to be an industry best practice rule called the 3-2-1 rule. That just meant 3 or more copies of your data on 2 different types of media so that you weren't dependent upon one specific type of technology. And at least one of those copies should be off-site to prevent against any kind of regionalized disaster. Last year, Veeam, we started to add some additional recommendations onto this long-standing rule. So we still believe in 3-2-1, but we've added another 1 and a 0. The one is we think at least one other additional copy ought to be in an immutable format, meaning it can't be compromised, it can't be deleted, it cannot be encrypted. And that 0 is the 0 backup errors that we referred to. At the time you take the backup, ensure that you have 0 errors to ensure that you truly are recoverable. Some of these things are best practices, and they've been best practices for quite some time. But I think cyber events, ransomware only magnify the issues that many organizations have that you mentioned of either not protecting all of the data or not applying best practices as generally or as universally as they should.
No, so you very convincingly explained how important it is to follow this 3-2-1 practice, and you added one more element to it. However, there are cost implications for any of such matured technology deployment. Do you think that these cost elements can be eased out for a customer, and how can we help in those?
Yeah, well, I've had a number of roundtable discussions when we're unfortunately still largely in a virtual world, but I've had a lot of virtual roundtables, a lot of Zoom meetings with customers, a lot of sort of town halls where otherwise we might have done in-person events. And when I talk to people that have been hit by cyber threats and ransomware, the trend is pretty universal, regardless of how big their organization is or what vertical they may be, what geography they might be. And that is, it's a lot less expensive to try to treat the problem early on to prepare than it is to try to unwind or recover. And in fact, I had the pleasure of being on a panel where if you remember NotPetya and Merck, the pharmaceutical company that almost went out of business. I think at that time they were a $39 billion organization. They weren't even the target. They were literally collateral damaged in a state-sponsored event, Russia against the Ukraine, that infiltrated accounting software that Merck, a pharmaceutical company, just happened to use. And unfortunately, that story, while certainly pretty well known and high magnitude, high profile, is not unique. I've spoken to higher education. I've spoken to even dairy farm that they didn't get hit, but the trucking company that would pick up the eggs and the cheese and the milk, that was affected, and therefore all of their income and livelihood got affected. And unfortunately, the reaction is, oh gosh, I would do anything now that I know, now that I've been compromised. However, it's too late at that point. Well, it's too late to fully prepare, but I also want to make the point, it's never too late to try to do something ahead of time. And I appreciate that there are challenges and constraints. We all have to live with limited time, limited money, limited personnel. So go after the major things that you can. Implement a proper backup solution, test that solution. Also look to harden ports where you can. Don't have as much network exposure unless you absolutely have to. Use strong passwords. They're just some simple things that really don't cost a great deal of money. However, they can be extremely effective. And I just want to mention one quick thing. Veeam, we have 400,000 customers globally. I think we're up to like 183 countries now. Unfortunately, every single day, our support center is helping people get through ransomware issues. And I asked the head of our support, because we have a dedicated team, we call them a SWAT team, that jumps into action as soon as we suspect this is a cyber event. And I said, well, you've been at this a few years now. What's the number one piece of advice you would give? And I was expecting him to say something like, here's how I'd configure a Veeam backup. I would do that sure backup capability so I had 0 errors. I'd follow the 3, 2, 1, 1, 0 rule. Nope. He said, I would encourage every organization to scare their employees. Tell them not to click on that link that's probably a phishing link. That if it looks funny, it is funny. I tell organizations, be careful about your remote desktop and how you now, from a work from home situation, how you hand out those credentials. So it was interesting that the moral of that story was, I would encourage people to do things that they should have been doing all along. It has nothing to do with a particular piece of technology, and it has nothing to do specifically with their business. It's just do proper things that we all should be doing anyway.
Yes, you are right. I mean, I was also reading somewhere that due to this changed scenario at the workplace, the bad actors, the threat actors are actually having picnic, and they are exploring newer destinations, and most of these destinations are available for them due to negligence. And that is a very true statement that your folks also made. I mean, it's all driven by common sense. And if you apply common sense, then most certainly you can actually prevent a lot of such attacks from happening. So a couple of more questions. Yes, it is true to have a great data backup strategy and also have a situational awareness. How does lack of visibility and intermittent monitoring, long backup and recovery cycles, how do these forces impact the organization business and organizational strategy?
Yeah, the impact is incredible. I mean, literally, if I use that Merck example, they felt like they were less than 48 hours from going out of business. So the impact can be the difference between an organization existing or not existing. And to put that in a more human perspective, that could equate to hundreds, tens of thousands of jobs, as well as an entire ecosystem. In the United States, for example, we had an oil and pipeline that was affected. People couldn't get gas. People couldn't get fuel. We had another situation where people couldn't get food. And if you think about what these bad actors are doing, in some cases, they're literally just casting the net, just trying to see what they can find. In other cases, it's very targeted, and they're targeting for maximum effect so that they can hopefully extract a large amount of money in return. But in so doing, they're literally going after organizations, but people as well. And what I mean by people is hospitals, the medical industry is particularly targeted. So the concern here becomes potentially loss of life, certainly at maybe a less extreme notion, loss of job, negative effect on the economy. So I would almost want to channel our inner support SWAT team leader and scare people into saying, you think that you don't have time to do backups. You think you don't have the time to look at your network security or to do additional employee training on phishing algorithms and encouraging them to, hey, don't click on that link. But imagine you really don't have the time to try to unwind the organization from 100% of your data potentially being affected, all while trying to do that at the same time that the organization's completely crippled. So if you think that the day-to-day operations and doing the best practices are a challenge, boy, you see nothing yet until a cyber event hits.
No, absolutely right. So, it has been wonderful speaking to you. So in the end, if I want you to, kind of give a very uber level view of what should be those key considerations in the backup domain that you would recommend to the CISOs and the CIOs, especially to prioritize against the ransomware threats?
Yeah, I'd probably net it down to four things. Number one, CIOs need to focus on data protection and data immutability, and then prioritize spending on a comprehensive data backup and protection strategy or solution to make sure you can excel, you can remain in business and drive your digital economy going forward. It's important to be resilient and have proactive measures in place ahead of time. Secondly, would be implement a strong multi-layered defense and strategy to address ransomware. This is really key because it comes down to a couple key elements and vital things: education, such as the phishing issue, implementation of your system, and then remediation about how you can unwind if you detect a bad actor has infiltrated. So ultra resilient approach to backing up and recovering and restoring data is important to the business so that you can continue operations in the event of a ransomware attack. I don't want to get too geeky or nerdy, but that 3-2-1-1-0 rule, it's so important. It always was best practice, but in a cyber event, 3 or more copies of your data on 2 different types of media, one of which is offsite, one of which is immutable, and ensure that you have 0 backup errors. Again, that notion, if you backed it up properly, you can restore it properly. If you have backup errors, you will have restore errors. It's garbage in, garbage out, if you remember that saying. So that rule is crucial to make sure that you've got a copy of backup either offline, air-gapped, immutable, so that you've got resilient data to help ensure that data recovery in a ransomware event is successful. Last, number 4, I would say focus on the fundamentals of data protection and immutable backups, and training the workforce is really key. Some of this has very little to do with technology. It's about people and behaviors. And I used to joke with that years ago that we're in a digital world, but really it comes down to analog. People. People are what determine best practices. People are what implement or fail to implement best practices. So focus on those 4 key areas and you will be much more resilient in the face of ever-increasing threats.
I was expecting this kind of a very simplistic prescription from you. And that is the reason why I wanted to have a word with you. Dave, thank you so much for spending time with us. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Have a very good day. Have a very nice day.
Thank you so much for having me, and pleasure to chat with you.